Thank you all for being here. My name is Keith Garvin. I'm an anchor with KPRC2, the NBC station here in town. I have been so blessed with so many opportunities to tell some really fascinating, amazing stories and meet so many amazing people. I have to say the stories, though, that have really shaped me and driven me, and the ones that have been the most interesting, are military-related stories. I myself never served, but I had a long history of family members who have. I've been to Iraq 3 times, Afghanistan once, during the wars. And I think when you see what our men and women go through, and you actually can witness it, it changes you. And I have to say, especially that first time in Iraq, I was one of those embedded journalists, if you remember, those embedded journalists. I was with a group of Marines from Camp Lejeune. And that story and everything I saw not only shaped me as a journalist, but also as a man and as an American. And so I do my best to tell military stories even now, when we're not necessarily in wide-ranging conflicts, but I think telling the stories of the men and women who serve our country is so very, very important. So I have the distinct honor of welcoming and introducing to you all our keynote speaker in this fireside chat, the person who's going to get all the attention. She is a retired brigadier general who served our country for more than 30 years. She began as an enlisted soldier, and after 11 years went to officer candidate school. During that time, she served a variety of command and staff positions and completed numerous overseas deployments, including a 15-month combat tour in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. She has received numerous awards and commendations, including Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and multiple awards of the Meritorious Service Medal. In her private sector career, she has been wildly recognized with awards and has topped the lists of Variety Magazine, Cable Facts, and various other national publications. In 2022, Carol was also appointed as a civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Comcast Senior Vice President of Military and Veteran Affairs, Carol Eggert.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a seat. All right,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Let's get comfortable.
I'm going to start.
Oh, please.
First of all,
please.
He said he didn't serve. Well, I'll tell you, there are many ways to serve. And the fact that you covered wars and you work with our military stories, you are a patriot and you are helping our military. So you have served, right?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, now you.
Okay, now me, okay. Yes, ma'am. A former general here, so I'm going to do exactly what she tells me to do. I want to ask you first, complete this sentence. Carol Eggert is, and you have the floor.
That's a really tough one. When you're as old as I am, there's a lot of things you have been, some you don't want to mention, and some you might want to share. But the bottom line or the baseline is that I'm motivated by service to others. And I'm inspired by everybody in this room who serves others. So my ego is fed by what we can do for others. But, along with that, I'm a mother, 3 kids. They all have jobs with benefits. That's when you know you've made it. Not getting them through school, it's getting them jobs. Well, I had nothing to do with their jobs. But they all have jobs with benefits, which is wonderful. And I think they still like us, me and my husband. We've been married 40 years, I think.
Somewhere around there?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
You're supposed to know. You're the one that's supposed to know.
Really?
Usually that's how it goes, but that's okay. Let's move on.
I usually ask him. And he has been very supportive. We talk about military families, and military families are essential. The Secretary of Defense will say the strength of our nation is our military, the strength of our military is our service members, but the strength of our service members are our military families. And that is so true. We deploy, we get called out to this. I mean, my husband for 15 months was in charge of the kids, which not a bad thing. I think but you have to realize you couldn't do what you do without those supportive families and friends who help you do what you do. So here's a hats off to all military families. And I think those of you who have served know about the mandatory physical fitness. You know, you have to take the physical fitness test twice a year. You better make sure you stay in shape. So that has been an embedded value. I think the test is always, can we stay in shape when no one's making us anymore? And it's a bit of a challenge, but we're cyclists, so we ride a lot. So I would say, inspired by those who serve, motivated by service to others, certainly a family person, and then also just health and wellness, and I would say a lifelong learner. I got my PhD at 58. Now you might say, what in the heck are you going to do with it at 58? But I'm actually going to teach at the college level. But it's just that you never stop learning, and not just school, read books, read books, so lifelong learning. Does that answer it?
Oh, that answers, yes, yeah. I do want to expound upon something that you said, an adage I've heard for a number of years. When the soldier or Marine or sailor serves, the whole family serves.
Yes.
It's not just that individual is doing an amazing job serving, but it's the entire family, as you said.
It's the entire family, and they continue to serve when our service members return. Our caregivers that take care of our wounded warriors, which I know some of our organizations here know about that, and even the kids that are responsible for caregiving of wounded warriors. So that service doesn't end just because the individual gets out of the service.
Indeed, indeed. All right, well, as we mentioned, you completed numerous military deployments, including Operation Iraqi Freedom. One of the things that fascinated me is that you actually were part of a strategic plan for the economic and political development of Iraqi women. Tell us about that and how that impacted you and how that all came about. That was, of course, under the U.S. Secretary of State.
Well, I would say it definitely had an impact on me. I thought it was a privilege to be able to help a developing country. And if you recall Hillary Clinton as a Secretary of State, she said, we will not stabilize countries unless we stabilize women and families. And that is just so true. So her effort was, whatever the military is doing over there, they have to make an emphasis on supporting women and families. So I was in charge of being the liaison between the military, because when it came to women, the economic empowerment, things like hydroponic farming, helping women set up their own farms. And if you understand the history of Iraq, you know many of the men fled when Saddam Hussein fell. So the women were left to hold together the families. Honey, you may not know this, we worked with the Japanese embassy to build honey farms. Honey is very big in the Middle East. And these women could sustain their families just by harvesting honey. So I considered that a privilege.
Wow.
The other thing we did is worked with the Iraqi Ministry of Defense and the Women's Ministry, which you'll chuckle on this. It was the Women's Ministry, but it had no budget. There was a lot of that in Iraq at the time, and I think part of that was the U.S. was putting requirements on the country as it developed. You know, you had to have, I laughed at one, you had to have, I think it was 50% of women in your Congress, or what we would have called the Congress. And I laughed because we didn't even have that in our Congress, so how could they put that on their Congress? So what you saw happening were women were just the front for the men who were behind them. So those sorts of things, to be aware of what goes on as you try to build a country. But I was really honored to work with the Iraqi. It was the first basic training class of Iraqi enlisted folks. And I got to go to their graduation. Now remember, I joined the Army in 1972. We were segregated by gender. So it was the Women's Army Corps, if anybody remembers the Women's Army Corps. Not many people do anymore. And we were required to wear lipstick and hose at all times. And to look attractive, like keep your hair nice. You never did any PT or physical training. We never were issued a weapon.
Wow.
So imagine going from that to being a combat veteran that gets injured in country. So what a trajectory I saw. And I saw that with our Iraqi basic trainees. These women, they joined the military for the same reasons we do, to better their families, to have educational opportunities, to, as the Army says, be all they can be. And it was inspiring to watch them. But I chuckled. Guess what they got when they had their graduation ceremony? the commanders, all men of course, gave them chocolates and flowers. I thought, okay, that's nice, but that's just it. They were trying to change culture, and it was out of the goodness of their heart, but I don't think they quite understood what message that was giving. But I felt that was an honor to be able to work with the women of Iraq. And you ask, how did that guide me? Mm-hmm. It made me appreciate our very messy democracy. People often criticize the United States, but that democracy, no matter how messy it is, it works. And I realized how much we have to be thankful for, mm-hmm. and also that we all have a responsibility to play our role in that democracy. Like if I meet somebody that doesn't vote, I just don't get it. What a privilege, because I watched people in Iraq walk 5 to 10 miles when they first got the vote, to get remember the ink finger, so that they could cast their vote. Now, you see that, and then you see people that won't even ride to the high school to vote. It's such a contrast. And so I would say it made me appreciate what we have here in America. It made me commit myself to serve our democracy and also to serve our military.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Indeed. Well, thank you for sharing that. As you well know, the transition from military life to civilian life is not easy. Work culture, expectations, norms are all very different. When you decided to join Comcast, how did that impact you, and how did that lead you to your decisions and in your role? How did that transition impact you?
Yes.
How did you handle it?
So Keith, that's a great question. One thing I would caution everyone is that not all transitions are the same, and we tend to lump veterans all together, but their transition stories and their transition challenges are very different. You get a young soldier that gets out after 3 years, so 21 years old, never had a job in the civilian sector. His transition or her transition is pretty tough. They went from high school to the military. But take someone who's been in for 12 or 15 years, they're familiar. As military people, we do community liaison work. So they're familiar, but maybe not exactly on the culture. But so that's a different story. And I'll tell you may not know this, but it's tough for colonels and generals to transition. Nobody wants a general. It's like, you're going to come in and take over. Same thing with colonels, colonels being 06, the next step is generals. So I would say every transition story is different, and I would suggest all of you take a look at one of our partners, if you want to jot this down, or we can send it out later. It's our partnership with Psych Armor. Psych Armor has put together short, targeted videos on how to engage the military community. My transition wasn't difficult. So I was on active duty, then I was in the National Guard. How many of you feel you understand the National Guard and Reserve? There you go, that made my transition a little tough. Because the National Guard has civilian jobs their whole time, while they're also serving our country. So they have to leave their job at a moment's notice often, and go serve their country. So you're in two worlds, so you understand the civilian world. And that's why it's so important that we help our people understand the civilian worlds. But mine was relatively easy. I wasn't looking for a job. I retired from the military. I had my military retirement. And then Comcast reached out and said, hey, would you be interested in interviewing? They did not offer me the job off the, people tend to know who's in the community. And I said, of course, any military person, what would you say if they say, can you come help us? We always say yes, whatever you need. And I say I'm so lucky because I wasn't looking for a job. I wasn't looking for a position, but I found a purpose to be able to continue to serve our military community.
Well, still speaking about the transition, when you think about your transition, what's the biggest rock or biggest obstacle that you've had to move when you set your priorities in your position now, and why was that the biggest rock, the biggest issue?
Well, another thing, when you get to be my age, there's never ever one biggest. There's like a boulder field of challenges all the way, and you've got to be alert to them, you've got to be able to pivot. But if I can sort of summarize, I would say it's creating an understanding of the military, building an internal culture so people understand Guard and Reserve are going to get a call and they have to leave their job and the boss can't say, no, you can't go. Lexicon was a big deal. When we started reaching out to military spouses and we provide military spouse benefits, we're talking about military spouses who are with Guard or Reserve or active duty members, and they get assigned to a different location. We make sure that spouse has a job in that location, or we help them with severance. But when we started, everybody was saying veterans and their spouses. So no, there's no transition benefit or severance benefit if you're a veteran spouse, because a veteran doesn't have to move around. So just understanding we're talking military spouses. Now, however, this is a technicality, military spouses are impacted even if they're not with someone who's still serving, because their resume will have gaps in it, all the times they did move. And what happens? What do we do? Tony, I'm sure you realize this. What do we do when we see a resume with a lot of gaps? Yeah, but if you understand why they're there and what it takes to move that many times, then you pull it back out and look at it. So a lot of cultural understanding, I think, was, I would say, my biggest challenge. The military is the most respected institution, but it is the least understood. Everybody says thank you for your service, but they don't know what that means. They don't understand your service. When you see someone at the airport in uniform, or you know someone that wears the cool hats and you can tell they're a veteran, say thank you for your service, but I would suggest you also say, tell me a little bit about your service. Get to know what they did, and they will light up. Just because somebody asks, what did you do? And they'll tell you about it, but I have never figured out what to say when someone says thank you for your service. Okay, I come up with thank you for your support, but really you don't know what to do. Or I say, please don't forget those who are overseas and in harm's way, and let's make sure we remember those. But it's a tough one, so that's your homework. Tell us a little bit about your service.
Yeah, okay. We want to talk now about the evolution of technology and also digital equity. You know, you enlisted in 1972. World has become certainly a different place over the last number of years, and even in the last 15 or 20 years especially. Pandemic, of course, accelerated the use of technology, but it also exposed a lot of really big disparities as well, especially for veterans. In fact, according to an FCC report, 15% of veteran households do not have an internet connection at home. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think there's many things that contribute to that. One thing is 25% of our veterans live in rural areas, and that's why the government has done such work to make sure we get access to everybody, and Comcast is doing their part, and I'm very proud of them to work with the Affordable Connectivity Program. Let's make sure veterans understand what these things are. I would say another thing is lack of digital literacy, but let me clarify that. I think most military members are very comfortable with technology because it's required, but when they come out, that doesn't mean they're comfortable with the civilian resources that are available there. But I want to touch on why is it so important that they have access? And I'm going to say that one way to make sure we get internet access to our veterans is these organizations in the room. So the VA isn't going to do it. They can't reach every veteran. They'll do the best they can. But it's you in the room that has access at the local level to the veterans and the military families to tell them about the resources that are available to them. So Comcast, we can do the things we do to support you so you can do the job with our veterans. Things happen at the local level. Those of you that served in the military, this is one of my favorite terms. You know, we think about the front lines. Well, you're in the front lines. You have the greatest access to our veterans. And I thank you for it, by the way. And we, Comcast, the government, the education, we're called combat enablers. We do the things to help you do the work. but it takes all of you in the room to get to our veterans and help them have the access they need. So please help share these resources that are available to our veteran. And together, you telling the stories, together I think we can make a dent in this.
Indeed. Last question for you, that leads me to this. So obviously, whether it's the government, Comcast, KPRC2, the oil and gas, whatever industry, it's important to have those relationships with our military community, our veteran community. Why so? Could you expound upon that? Why is it important to have those relationships, those partnerships?
Well, I think it was Helen Keller who said, you can do so much with one hand, but we can do so much more with two hands together. You just can't operate as a single entity. I mean, look at what's going on here. The government has a role with policy. Let's make sure we get the policies right. Our community organizations have a role. I work with Psych Armor. I work with other employers to help them understand how to best engage with the military community. We've become thought leaders in this space because Comcast gave us the privilege to stand up a team. 6 years ago, we have a team of 10 folks committed to serving the military community. That is a privilege, and I felt that we needed to give back. So we started our partnership with Psych Armor, as I said, to get content out there so people could understand how to best engage. We have a partnership with SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. So our HR professionals can get certified with veterans at work, how to understand, how to read these resumes, what not to ask. So partnerships matter because you can't do it alone.
Gotcha.
And so thank you once again for being here. I think I just said you're the front lines and we're the combat enablers.
All right, and this is why I didn't tell the truth. This is my very last question. What's the last thing you would want to leave this audience with today?
So I think it's important that we understand who you are so that we can maximize those relationships. But likewise, I do see VSOs that don't reach out past their own community. Understand what the foundations can do, what the corporate world can do for you, how we can assist, create partnerships with your businesses out there. And then let's just all work together. So once again, I'm going to say thank you for who you are and what you're doing.
Okay, all right. Carol Eggert, Senior Vice President for Comcast Military and Veterans Affairs.
Thank you.
Thank you.